Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are at yet another hearing called by Democrats on gun control. Understand that today's Democrats in the Senate, these are not your father's Democrats. There are no moderate Democrats left in Congress. Today's Democrats, when it comes to guns, their objective is to disarm law-abiding citizens. They simultaneously embrace policies that release violent criminals from jail. They're not interested in locking up murderers. They're not interested in locking up gangbangers. They're not interested in locking up violent criminals. Instead, they systematically support policies that release violent criminals. By the way, if you are hesitant to believe me when I say this, perhaps you'll believe the mayor of Dallas. The mayor of Dallas, Eric Johnson, who's a friend, is a lifelong Democrat. He's African-American mayor, elected in Dallas, been a Democrat his whole life until just recently. He left the Democrat Party and became a Republican. Now, let me read you why Mayor Johnson became a Republican. Quote, "Unfortunately, many of our cities are in disarray. Mayors and other local elected officials have failed to make public safety a priority or to exercise fiscal restraint. Most of these local leaders are proud Democrats who view cities as laboratories for liberalism rather than as havens for opportunity and free enterprise. Too often, local tax dollars are spent on policies that exacerbate homelessness, coddle criminals, and make it harder for ordinary people to make a living. And too many local Democrats insist on virtue signaling, proposing half-baked government programs that aim to solve every single societal ill and on finding new ways to thumb their noses at Republicans at the state and federal level." I have to say to an ordinary person, the political ideology of today's Democrats makes no sense. Why your priority is disarming a law-abiding citizen, but not going after the violent criminal. And to be clear, it is the radical left that advocates abolishing the police and defunding the police. And when I say there are no moderate Democrats left, the Biden administration has nominated not one, not two, but three of the leading advocates of abolishing the police to senior positions at the U.S. Department of Justice. Every single Democrat on this committee voted to confirm every single one of them, but not just on this committee. Every single Democrat in the United States Senate voted to confirm all three of the Biden nominees, including Rachel Rollins, nominated by the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts, one of the leading advocates of abolishing the police, as a local prosecutor. She put out a list of violent crimes that she wouldn't prosecute. You know what? We're not having a hearing on the impact of Soros prosecutors releasing violent criminals from jail. We're not having a hearing on carjacking in Washington, D.C., because the Democrat City Council lowered the penalty for carjacking, lowered the penalty for murder. We're not having a hearing on Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Texas, who was carjacked in Washington, D.C. at 9:30 at night. We're also not having a hearing on the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots across the country, because to Democrats, when stores are being looted, when police cars are being firebombed, when police officers are being murdered, that's not a crisis if they agree with the ideology of the criminals. Instead, their objective is they want to take away the firearm from the single mom who's taking the subway home at night, who that is the only prevention she has against the violent criminals that the Democrats are unleashing. And by the way, to give you an underscoring of it, look, we have a mental health crisis in this country. I've repeatedly introduced legislation to improve school safety, to invest to double the number of police officers in schools. Democrats objected. To invest $15 billion in mental health counselors in schools. Democrats objected. Their priority is not stopping the criminals. Their priority is disarming law-abiding citizens. And by the way, they call it a public health crisis because they want to put supposed experts in charge of disarming you. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights is not a public health crisis. What is a public health crisis is the crime rates that are skyrocketing because Democrats keep letting murderers and violent criminals out of jail. But Dr. Rainey, let me ask you a question in terms of public health. Right now today, what's the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45?
I believe that it's opioids.
It is drug overdoses. Last year, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. 70% of that came from Chinese fentanyl that is flooding across our southern border because this administration has opened up our southern border to 8.6 million illegal immigrants, has enriched the drug traffickers. Do you think, Dr. Rainey, that fentanyl flooding across our open border on the south that has killed collectively 100,000 overdoses last year, do you think that's a public health crisis?
Absolutely. Synthetic fentanyl is a major crisis, and Senator Reid from my home state of Rhode Island has been a leader in trying to stop the supply of synthetic fentanyl.
Except he hasn't, because Senator Reid, along with every other Democrat, supports Joe Biden's open borders, because when we try to secure the borders, they block it over and over and over again. And the criminals who come across, who are taking people's lives, that is because the Democrats refuse to enforce the law.
Senator Cruz, equally important is harm reduction to ensure that those who use opioids have access to things like Suboxone or buprenorphine and methadone to help so that they don't use illicit substances off the street. Thank you.
Committee will come to order. I now recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Mrs. Green, for her 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So far today on this very important historic hearing, we've listened to Democrats complain that Republicans have done nothing to stop the border security crisis, pretending that we didn't pass H.R. 2, the strongest border bill that has ever been passed in Congress. All of our Democrat colleagues voted no to that bill. My Democrat colleagues today are complaining that they need more money. Well, it seems to be from listening on this committee most of the time, they want more money to help more migrants come into the country. It's unfortunate that it's about migrants. It should be about Americans. I've also listened to them talk about impeachment. Talking about impeachment, saying that impeachment is not the right thing to do when it comes to Secretary Mayorkas complaining about impeachment hearings. But I'd like to remind everyone that when they impeached President Trump, they introduced articles of impeachment on January 11th, held 0 hearings, and then passed these articles of impeachment on January 13th. Oh my, the hypocrisy. But let's talk a little bit further. Let's talk about something I heard from one of our witnesses today, saying that impeachment is needed or necessary or warranted when this person has acted in the interest of a foreign power, that's an impeachable offense. Well, let's talk about how we could argue Secretary Mayorkas has definitely acted for a foreign power. Former special agent for DEA's Special Operations Division testified under oath that the cartels have control over the United States southern border. The cartels, not our government, not our border patrol. That's a foreign power. Cartels and coyotes are making around $13 billion a year in human trafficking alone off Joe Biden's open border policies and Secretary Mayorkas's willful disobedience in his job. The revenue is 26 times more than cartels earned under President Trump. 26 times more. That would definitely be helping a foreign power. I'm sure that money's spent in countries like Mexico. That helps their economy. Cartels control approximately 40% of Mexico. The cartels do. That means that this border crisis and the laws that are being broken are definitely in the interest of a foreign power. Now, we're also hearing a debate back and forth about policy. Is it a policy difference Or is it Secretary Mayorkas's disobedience and his willfulness to break our federal laws? I ask that question because I want to know, is it the Biden administration's policy to kill 300 Americans every single day to fentanyl? Is it the Biden administration's policy that cartel members are allowed to come in our country and are released? These are unaccompanied minors. Are they allowed by the Biden administration's policy to come in the country and rape and murder young women? Is it the Biden administration's policy for nearly 100,000 unaccompanied minor children to go missing in our country? Is it the Biden administration's policy for child labor, migrant child labor that was talked about in the New York Times? Is that the Biden administration's policy? If so, then maybe we shouldn't be having hearings on my articles of impeachment to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Maybe we should be holding articles of impeachment on the President of the United States. Is that where we're going? What do you think about that, Ms. Pearlstein? Do you think, is it a policy difference or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Which one, Biden, Joe Biden, or Secretary Mayorkas?
My impression of the allegations that the majority has raised here is that they are entirely about policy differences with
Ms. Pearlstein, you've talked about policy in your testimony today. Policy, so that would be Joe Biden. I'm sure you voted for him for president. You've been talking about the Biden administration's policy has been the cause of all of this. So is it Joe Biden's policy, the administration's policy, or is it Secretary Mayorkas?
The Constitution, no matter which official.
Ms. Pearlstein asked you a question. Is it the Biden administration or is it Secretary Mayorkas? Not the Constitution. We're not talking about the Constitution. Is it the Biden administration's open border policies or is it Secretary Mayorkas breaking federal law? One or the other. Because the statistics are clear. Are you capable of answering that question?
I'm not sure. Those were about 4 questions.
No, it's one or the other. Biden administration, open border policies, or Secretary Mayorkas.
One or the other what? Who caused it?
That has caused 300 Americans to die every single day. These 2 women sitting next to you's daughters have been murdered. We're talking about over 100,000, nearly 100,000 unaccompanied minors missing in this country. We're talking about cartel members everywhere, the cartel controlling the southern border. We're talking about the massive increase in statistics. It's either one or the other. It's either the Biden administration's open border policies or it's Secretary Mayorkas.
Ma'am, I'm
okay,
a
we'll
professor
take
of constitutional law.
No, you can't
Okay.
point to the Constitution.
All right, so we're a little over here. you.